Hello?
Would you come down, please?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Binger.
Mr. Lackowski, I just have a few follow-up questions after Attorney Chirafisi had questioned you. At any point in that evening, did you receive a report that you or other folks guarding 59th Street needed to go down to 63rd to put out a fire?
No.
Or to deal with any sort of property damage at that location?
No.
So when you decided to go down there in the end, it was simply because you heard gunshots?
Yes.
You were asked about your FBI statement regarding what you heard the defendant say.
Yes.
That was a statement that you gave to the FBI on September 1st of 2020. Does that sound right?
Yes.
That would have been about 6 or 7 days after the incident occurred?
Yes.
Was your memory of what occurred on the night of August 25th fresher in your mind at the time you spoke to the interview than it is today?
Correct.
When you spoke with the FBI, did they identify themselves as law enforcement agents?
Yes.
Did you understand that they were there to ask you about what had happened on the night of August 25th?
Yes.
At that time, did you know that 2 people had been killed that night?
Yes.
Did you feel that you had a responsibility to cooperate with the investigation?
Yes.
Did you feel like you wanted to be as open and honest with the FBI agents as possible?
Yes.
Did you feel like you wanted to give them as much information as you could about the events of that night?
Yes.
When you spoke to them, did you tell them the truth?
Yes.
Did you understand that if you lied to law enforcement, that that would potentially be criminal activity?
Yes.
And when you spoke to the FBI, you were clear with them about what the defendant had said to you when you met him on the street. Is that right?
At that point, when I recollected, yes.
The reason I ask that is because
You need to explain.
Sure. When Attorney Chirafisi was asking you, I think you said you weren't sure, as you sit here today, what the defendant said. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Is that because over the last 14 months, some of the details are no longer as clear to you as they were when you spoke to the FBI on September 1st, 2020?
Yes.
Your statement to the FBI, where you told them Rittenhouse's face was pale white, and he stated that he didn't shoot anyone but needed help. That was accurate, correct?
Yes.
It was accurate that he stated that, or that was accurate as the fact?
Do
It
you
was
understand?
accurate that I had stated that at that point in time, yes.
And was that, in fact, what the defendant had said to you?
From what I recollect at that point in time, yes.
You characterized Mr. Rosenbaum and the way people around him were reacting to him, and I think you used the word they were disassociating from him. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Did you see anyone else that appeared to be friendly towards Mr. Rosenbaum, or somebody that he was in association with or accompanying that night?
Not that I recall, no.
Did he appear to be solo?
Not that I recall.
I'm a little confused, so help me understand. Did he appear to be in the company of any other people?
I was confused at that. There was people around him, but I'm not sure if they were associated with him.
Did you see anyone that you felt was associated with him or accompanying him or anything like that?
Not that I recall, no.
You were shown a photograph which has been marked exhibit number 14, and you were asked to identify Mr. Rosenbaum, and you were asked about this person behind him. Do you have any idea who that was?
No, sir.
Do you recall seeing that person at any point on the night of August 25th?
No.
Could we please show an excerpt from exhibit 18? Mr. Lackowski, there is a female in this almost center of the video, a little center left, with a backpack on and a dark shirt and blue jeans. Do you see that person?
Yes.
Do you recall ever seeing that person on the night of August 25th?
No.
And I'll state for the record for the jury, there's no dispute. That is Kelly Zeminski, and standing next to her is Joshua Zeminski, whose face can be seen here in exhibit number 40, just for the record. With regard to those two people that I've drawn your attention to, were they around Mr. Rosenbaum when Mr. Rosenbaum was stepping at you and saying the things he was saying? Do you recall?
Not that I recall.
You characterize Mr. Rosenbaum as the most aggressive person out there that night. Is that fair to say?
From my recollection, yes.
Did you ever see him physically harm anyone?
No.
Did you ever hear him threaten to physically harm anyone?
No.
At any point on the evening of August 25th, did you personally witness anyone physically harm anyone else?
No.
You mentioned that at one point you walked past the Ultimate gas station. And just so we're clear, the Ultimate gas station is right here on the southeast corner of 60th and Sheridan. Do you see where I'm pointing at?
Yes.
And you know, as you sit here today, you're familiar with that location? Is that a yes?
Yes, sorry.
Is that the location that you're talking about that you passed by at one point?
Yes.
What I want to ask is, where in the timeline did that occur?
Right when I got there. I had parked my vehicle on the one street over, and then I walked up. I think it's a 60th.
Would you be able to use that pointer to show us what you just described?
I parked somewhere back here, and then I walked up 60th.
Okay. So you're pointing along what I think is 8th Avenue, is that right, guys? 8th Avenue there by Library Park, and then walked up to 60th and headed west on 60th.
Yes.
And that was the only time in the evening when you passed by the Ultimate, that you stopped at the Ultimate gas station?
Yes.
The final thing I want to inquire about is the folks that were shouting as you encountered Mr. Rittenhouse and Mr. Rittenhouse was running north on Sheridan. I think the one thing that you've described hearing is the words "get him." Is
Yes.
that right? Do you recall any other specific words that the crowd was saying?
No.
I'm going to try and ask you to put yourself back in the mindset of that night, at that moment when you heard that. Who did you think the him was?
I'm not too sure, to be honest.
Was it obvious to you that the him was the defendant, Kyle Rittenhouse?
No.
At that moment in time, did you have any reason to believe that the defendant had shot anyone?
No.
Did you have any reason to believe that when people are shouting or pointing or doing whatever, that they were meaning the defendant, Kyle Rittenhouse?
No.
I have no further questions.
Any cross?
I do, briefly. When you heard "get him," you didn't know that Mr. Rittenhouse
had shot Mr. Rosenbaum, right?
Correct.
Okay. Would it be fair to say, though, whoever they were yelling, get him to, that person had something to be concerned about?
Yes.
And Mr. Binger asked you, did you see Mr. Rosenbaum yell at anyone or threaten anyone, right?
Correct.
Okay. Did you hear anybody else demanding to be shot that evening other than Mr. Rosenbaum?
No.
Did you hear any other white people using racial epithets in the way that Mr. Rosenbaum was using them that evening?
Not that I can recall, no.
Now, I just want to clarify your statement to the FBI, okay? When Kyle made contact with you, was that in the portion of your statement or your testimony where you don't have a good recollection of it? You had said you had blacked out. Was that during
After the meeting with that little meeting I guess I had with Kyle, and then I had followed him down, and I heard gunshots behind me, and then I had heard gunshots behind me once again. At that point, next thing I remember is seeing Gaige.
Okay, so I'm not being critical about this, but you hear what you believe to be a rifle shots fired near 63rd and Sheridan.
Yes.
You see Kyle Rittenhouse running in your direction.
Yes.
You hear people yelling, "Get him."
Yes.
He tells you, whether he says, "I just shot somebody" or "I didn't shoot somebody, but I need help," at that point, you don't suspect that he may have been the person who shot someone?
It didn't cross my mind, no.
Is that in part because he wasn't aggressive during the night?
I'm going to object.
Correct.
This is beyond the scope.
Even if it is, I generally do not adhere strictly to that rule. So,
Is that part of, you wouldn't have a reason to believe he shot someone because he wasn't acting aggressive when I say he, meaning Mr. Rittenhouse?
Correct.
My final question is this. As you sit here now and think about that statement, does it make more logical sense to you that he would have said that he shot somebody and he needs help versus he didn't shoot somebody but needs help?
I'm going to object, Your Honor. This is beyond the scope. It's been asked and answered, and the record is clear that this witness has testified to what the defendant has said.
why don't you rephrase your question? The first part, they asked and answered, as I said, we're here to develop the facts for the jury, and we all have seen abuses where people lie back and hold their questions until they're into a redirect or a recross. But I haven't seen that from either side in this case, so I'm not going to swerve from my usual indulgence with these kinds of things. But on the second point, I think the question should be restructured.
So I know that you've testified about what you believe you heard that night, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what I'm asking that you do is, have you looked at your statement since you gave it? Have you ever read your statement?
A few days ago, and then in the court.
Who had you read your statement?
Myself.
Who gave it to you? Sorry.
I did.
Okay, so you met with Mr. Binger?
Yes.
I want to be clear. Is this his statement or a statement, a summary made by the FBI?
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay.
So the statement that Mr. Binger provided to you was a statement written by the FBI saying what you told them?
Yes.
Okay. So remembering that, now my question to you was this. Having read that statement, and the portion I'm talking about is what Kyle said to you, does it make more logical sense to you today, or when you had, and he can shake his head if he wants, while you're sitting here now, why would he need help if he didn't shoot someone?
I'm going to object.
Argumentative.
Okay. I have no other questions. Thank you.
I have one final question, Your Honor. Mr. Lackowski, you said you didn't think the get him was aimed at Mr. Rittenhouse, right?
Yes.
At that moment in time, you didn't think Mr. Rittenhouse shot anybody because he said he didn't shoot anybody, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, then you may step down, sir. I mean, they don't just fax those?
Call Amber Rasmussen.
Yeah, if I said once.
Raise your right hand. Solemnly swear the testimony about to give in this matter be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do. You may be seated.
Can you please state your name and spell it for the benefit of the court reporter?
Amber Rasmussen, AmberRasmussen.
And where are you employed?
I am employed at the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory in Milwaukee.
And what is your position there?
I am a DNA analyst in the DNA analysis unit.
And how long have you been a DNA analyst?
I have been employed as a DNA analyst for just over 10 years.
And what is your educational background?
I have a Bachelor's of Science in Biology and Human Biology from the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, as well as a Master's of Science in Forensic Science from Marshall University.
And what are your primary duties as a forensic scientist in DNA analysis?
As a DNA analyst, we will receive evidence, analyze that evidence for any possible biological materials, attempt to develop a DNA profile from that evidence, make any comparisons to known individuals, write a report on our findings, and testify to those findings in court if needed.
And have you received any specialized training in the areas of DNA analysis?
Yes, in addition to my education, I also received approximately 9 months of on-the-job training prior to being signed off as a full DNA analyst. I also undergo annual training and review current literature.
And are you a member of any professional organizations related to forensic science?
Yes, I am a member of both the Midwest Association of Forensic Science as well as the American Academy of Forensic Sciences.
And is your laboratory accredited by any organization?
Yes, we are accredited by, it's ANAB, which is an acronym for another acronym, but it is American National Accreditation Board, ANSI, ASQ, National Accreditation Board.
And is there any sort of proficiency testing or peer reviewing that you participate at your laboratory?
Yes, we participate in both proficiency testing and peer review. Proficiency testing is when an external company provides us a test with known results, and we work that test as if it were a case and send our results back to them, and they verify that we obtain the correct results on that case. Peer review or technical review is when another analyst evaluates our work and work we did on a case, and they review every case. Another trained analyst will review every case that we work within the lab.
And what actually is what people commonly refer to as DNA? What actually is it?
DNA is often referred to as the building block of life. It is present in all living things. It is the same throughout your body. It is unique to each individual except for identical twins, and it's what makes you who you are. It's what makes you a human. It's what determines your genetic characteristics.
And how do you test for DNA, or what's the process you use?
So for forensic testing, we look at areas of DNA that aren't typically associated with physical characteristics. They are areas often referred to as junk DNA, but we have found these areas that vary from individual to individual, and one individual may have the same DNA type at a location as another, but when we look at multiple types, that will vary from person to person, and we can use that totality of DNA types within an individual's DNA profile to differentiate between DNA from different people.
Now, when I read these reports, there's something called an STR. What is an STR?
An STR is a specific reference to the type of DNA we look at. STR stands for short tandem repeat, which is the small repeated sequences of DNA that we use for our analysis.
And is that kind of analysis a commonly or generally accepted procedure in forensic science?
Yes, it is.
And how do you go about doing a STR DNA analysis?
So first we will take an item of evidence, whether it is swabs or clothing, and we will take a sample from that item, and we will subject that sample to a series of reagents in order to break open any cells that may be present, clean up that sample from anything that is not DNA, and end up with a small volume of liquid that contains purified DNA. We will then take that small sample and count how much DNA is present and run it through our system to make copies of those areas that we use in our analysis.
Now, I've placed a document in front of you that has been labeled in another way, Exhibit 22. Can you please take a look at that document and tell me if you recognize it?
Is this the document?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, this is a copy of my confidential report of laboratory findings for laboratory case R20-2992, dated June 25th, 2021. And I can tell that it is my report because there is my signature on the first page and my initials on each subsequent page.
So, did you review that report before coming to testify today?
Yes.
And is this, as far as you can, is this a true and accurate copy of your report?
Yes.
I'd like to move Exhibit 22 into evidence. Now, in this case, is this case related to the Kyle Rittenhouse? This report related to the Kyle Rittenhouse case?
Yes.
And what did you receive to test for DNA in this case?
In this case, we received 3 sets of swabs from a firearm, 2 sets of swabs from an ammunition magazine, and 3 standard or reference samples from known individuals.
What is a standard or reference sample?
A standard or reference is a sample that is directly collected from a person, and we use that to establish what that individual's DNA profile is, and we can then use that for comparison to any questioned evidentiary profiles we obtain.
And the 3 standards in this case you received from Joseph Rosenbaum, Anthony Huber, and Kyle Rittenhouse?
Yes.
Now, Kyle Rittenhouse's standards is called a buccal swab. What is that?
A buccal swab is a swab of the buccal cells, which are the inside of your cheek, contains buccal swabs. So these are basically swabs that are taken from the inside of a person's mouth.
And the ones from Mr. Rosenbaum and Mr. Huber are dried blood standards. What are those?
Dried blood standards are when blood is applied to usually a card, and then we can take a sample of that blood to develop a profile.
So you can get the DNA from the dried blood.
Yes.
And you talked about swabs from a firearm and from some ammunition magazines. Can you describe how that process is done?
Which part of the process?
I'm sorry. What do you mean by swabs? Like, what do you actually receive?
So in this case, what was received were envelopes containing swab boxes, which are small boxes that contain basically a wooden stick with cotton on the end, a long-handled Q-tip. And each of those boxes was marked as having been collected from a different area of either the firearm or from a magazine. In this case, there was one set of swabs marked as having been collected from a trigger, another from a barrel guard, and another from a pistol grip, and then 2 sets from a magazine. And what we do is we will cut off the cotton portion of that swab, and that is what proceeds in our testing to try to develop a DNA profile.
So is it your understanding that someone would have taken that swab, swabbed the parts or the items that are listed, and then packaged it up and sent them to you?
Yes.
So it's being represented to you that the gun has been swabbed by these Q-tips?
Yes.
Or not technically a Q-tip, but. Now, did you find any DNA on any of those swabs?
Yes.
Where did you find DNA?
There was DNA detected on all 5 of those evidentiary items.
And what did you do once DNA was detected?
I attempted to develop a profile from each of those, and then attempted to interpret those profiles and make any comparisons to those.
Now, for the trigger swab, was there any DNA found from the trigger swab?
Yes.
And who was the source of that DNA?
A single source male profile was obtained from the swabs from the trigger, and Kyle Rittenhouse is the source of that DNA profile.
Now, the next finding is swabs from the barrel guard. Is that a part of a gun?
Yes.
And what were the findings on the barrel guard?
The barrel guard contained a mixture of DNA, so there was DNA present from at least 2 people. This contained DNA from at least 1 male. And assuming that there were 2 people present, I was able to do a comparison to each of the 3 different individuals in this case. Would you like me to read those results as well?
Let me ask you one question before you do that. You said you used a process or a procedure called STR mix. Just briefly, what is that?
STR Mix is a software program that helps us to interpret DNA and analyze DNA profiles, and it also helps to perform comparisons to the DNA profiles.
Is this the standard you use when there are potential mixtures?
It is most often used for mixtures, yes.
Is it the only thing your lab uses for mixtures now?
We do, in certain cases, we do have, we can not use this software and we can do a manual interpretation.
Now, what were your findings on the barrel guard?
For the barrel guard, this was a 2-person mixture, and assuming there are 2 people present, we compared 2 different hypotheses or propositions or explanations for the data. The first explanation is that this DNA profile came from the person of interest in an unknown individual, and the second is it came from 2 unknown individuals. So in this case, there were 3 different persons of interest, which were each compared separately to that mixture profile. There was strong support for exclusion for Joseph D. Rosenbaum. It is at least 70,000 times more likely to observe the DNA profile if it is a mixture from 2 unknown individuals than it is a mixture resulting from Joseph Rosenbaum and an unknown individual. There is very strong support for exclusion for Anthony M. Huber in this mixture. It is at least 2 billion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from 2 unknown individuals than Anthony M. Huber and another unknown individual. And there is very strong support for inclusion for Kyle H. Rittenhouse. It is at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from Kyle Rittenhouse and an unknown individual than if it is a mixture resulting from 2 unknown individuals.
So am I understanding that there's strong support to exclude Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Huber on that DNA analysis, but very strong support to include Kyle Rittenhouse?
Yes.
Now, were the next item is the swabs from the pistol grip. What were the results from that? Was that also with the STR mix?
This was also a two-person mixture, including at least one male, and it was also interpreted using the StarMix software.
So what were the findings on that item?
Because this was a two-person mixture, our possible explanations are the same. We have either the person of interest in an unknown or two unknown individuals. And for the pistol grip, there is strong support for exclusion for Joseph D. Rosenbaum. It is at least 657,000 times more likely to observe this profile if it is a mixture resulting from two unknown individuals than if it is a mixture resulting from Joseph D. Rosenbaum and another unknown individual. There is strong support for exclusion for Anthony M. Huber. It is at least 13,000 times more likely to observe this profile if it is a mixture from two unknown individuals than if it is a mixture from Anthony M. Huber and another unknown individual. And there is very strong support for inclusion for Kyle H. Rittenhouse. It is at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from Kyle Rittenhouse and an unknown than if it is a mixture from two unknown individuals.
Is it fair to say that's essentially the same findings as the swabs from the barrel guard, but the numbers and the likelihoods are different?
They are similar conclusions, yes.
Now, the next item is the magazine swabs. What were your findings from the magazine swabs?
There were 2 sets of magazine swabs submitted in this case. The first set was a low-level 2-person mixture that contained DNA from at least one male. And this was also interpreted with StarMix.
And what were the results?
There is moderate support for exclusion for Joseph D. Rosenbaum. It is at least 2,670 times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture from two unknown individuals than if it is a mixture from Joseph D. Rosenbaum and an unknown individual. The conclusion was uninformative for Anthony M. Huber. The statistical value generated for his comparison has been seen for both individuals known to be included in a mixture and known not to be included. So our laboratory will not make a conclusion in this statistical range. There is very strong support for inclusion for Kyle H. Rittenhouse. It is at least 1 quadrillion times more likely to observe this DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from Kyle Rittenhouse and an unknown than if it is a mixture resulting from two unknown individuals.
Now, so in terms of Mr. Huber, you cannot either exclude or include him.
Correct. The amount of DNA present from the second contributor, and this is a low-level mixture, there was less information present, so we are less able to make a definitive answer one way or another.
What is a low-level mixture?
Low level just means that there isn't much DNA present, or not our ideal amount of DNA for performing an interpretation. So there is less DNA than a full profile from all of the contributors to the mixture.
Does there have to be a certain amount or a certain quality of DNA present in order for your laboratory to continue with testing?
We have a threshold where, so we count I mentioned earlier, we count how much DNA is in a sample, and we have a threshold where we have determined we may get results. Anything below that does not continue in our laboratory process. But as far as once results are generated, we will see if we can make comparisons. Sometimes there isn't enough data to make comparisons.
Now, the last item here is the second set of magazine swabs. What were the findings there?
This was also a low-level 2-person mixture with at least one male present, and this was also interpreted using the StarMix software.
And again, what were the findings?
The presence of Joseph D. Rosenbaum's DNA within this mixture was uninformative. Statistical values in this range have been observed for both individuals known to be included in a mixture and known to not be included in a mixture. So we will not make a conclusion regarding his presence of DNA in the mixture. Anthony M. Huber was also uninformative. Statistical values such as those obtained for his profile are inconclusive, and we will not make a conclusion. And Kyle H. Rittenhouse, there was strong support for inclusion of his profile within the mixture. It is at least 874,000 times more likely to observe the DNA profile if it is a mixture resulting from Kyle Rittenhouse and an unknown individual than if it is a mixture resulting from two unknown individuals.
What is touch DNA?
Touch DNA is the term that is often used to refer to the DNA that is transferred to an item when a person touches or handles it.
And is it more or less likely to transfer DNA in a touch DNA situation than, say, if bleeding onto an item?
Body fluids are a definite source of and good source of DNA. Touch DNA will vary greatly in the amount of DNA contained in the resulting sample. It will vary based on how long the object was handled, how much friction or pressure was involved, how recently that individual had washed their hands, if they had touched their face prior to touching the item. There are quite a number of factors. So touch DNA has much more variance in the quality of DNA obtained.
So, assuming your hand is not bleeding or doesn't have any sort of other bodily fluid on it, what kind of cells would you be expecting to find if it's touch DNA? Like, from where in the body or what fluids in the body?
Touch DNA is often from skin cells or transferred from, as I said, usually touching your face is the most likely source of DNA. Or touching any other items may also be a secondary transfer of DNA.
So if I touch this television here briefly, I may or may not leave DNA behind on it.
You probably left DNA behind. Whether it was enough to be detectable via our methods is a different question.
But if I sat here and touched it for a longer period of time, or if my hands were particularly sweaty, would it be fair to say that it'd be more likely there'd be enough DNA to test?
Yes.
Now, we in the courtroom have seen a video that shows Mr. Huber making contact with the firearm that was in question here. How could it be that Mr. Huber makes contact with the firearm and does not leave DNA behind?
As far as leaving DNA behind or being detected on the samples we received, touch DNA, again, can vary. There may have been very little DNA on his hands when he handled that object. It may have been wiped away later. The sample may have been exposed to heat or moisture or undergone a duration of time before it was collected, and all of those things will limit the amount of DNA that can be detected.
Is it true, let me ask it this way, does your lab have restrictions on what they will accept in terms of items for simply touch DNA analysis?
Yes.
And why is that, to the best of your knowledge?
We have submission guidelines for touch DNA items. They are less likely to result in usable DNA profiles, and we will not accept touch DNA items on nonviolent cases.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Cross-examine.
Can I ask you, Ms. Rasmussen, when you get a sample to be tested, who tells you what area, in this case, so there's a firearm, right? You test?
The DNA unit did not receive the firearm itself in this case.
What did you receive?
We received swabs that were collected from a firearm.
Okay. And so when law enforcement sends those to you, they tell you this swab was taken from this area of the firearm or this area of the firearm, and we'd like you to test it. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree that you never got a swab from the barrel of that gun?
The barrel guard was the closest to my knowledge, that was obtained from the barrel of the gun.
Do you know what a barrel guard is?
I do not.
Okay. You'd agree, however, it's listed barrel guard. There's nothing on here listing barrel of gun.
Correct.
So if, for example, Joseph Rosenbaum touched the barrel of that gun, we'll never know that, right?
I have no way of determining it.
Because it wasn't sent to you for analysis, right?
Yes.
Now, Jim. Mr. Rasmussen, I'm going to show you what has been marked exhibits 45 and 46 for identification. I just would like if you can tell me what you see in those exhibits.
In Exhibit 45, I see a person walking the opposite direction of whoever's taking the photo, and a person on the ground, and there's an object connecting them. The person on the ground appears to be holding on to the object.
Okay. Jim, can you tell me if you okay? No disagreement that the person on the ground is Mr. Rittenhouse? No disagreement that the person standing up is Mr. Huber? No disagreement that the object in between them is a firearm?
No disagreement.
Okay. So, Mr. Rasmussen, if I told you that person standing there is Anthony Huber, okay, that we agree on that, you agree that it appears Anthony Huber is touching that, and we agree that's a gun. You'd agree that Anthony Huber is touching that gun, right? Appears to be he's touching that gun?
It appears to be.
Okay. Now, in the areas, so the fact there's no DNA present in the areas you were asked to look at doesn't mean that the person didn't actually touch the firearm. We see it, right?
Correct.
Okay.
The DNA, yeah, correct.
Okay. Can you do the other one, please? So if I told you that's a different angle, that's Mr. Rittenhouse on the ground, that's Mr. Huber holding the skateboard, and that's a firearm, you'd agree it appears that Mr. Huber is touching that firearm. Would you agree with that?
That appears to be the case.
Okay. And so the fact that, I don't know where that is on the gun, but the fact that the DNA isn't there, and everybody thinks DNA is this thing that proves everything, you'd agree that we can see he's actually touching the firearm.
What is your question?
Well, the fact that it's not present, and I don't know where on the gun that is, but the fact that DNA is not present in any of the areas of the firearm for Mr. Huber doesn't mean that he didn't actually touch it.
Correct. Whether DNA was detected from an individual or not does not mean that they did not touch that item.
And I think you said, and tell me if I have this right, the shorter amount of time someone touches something, the less likely there'll be DNA which you can compare or find.
Yes, the less an item is handled, the less I would expect there to be an opportunity for DNA to transfer.
Was there ever a follow-up request by law enforcement to test any other areas of that gun?
Not to my knowledge. That may not have gone directly to me, though it may have been to someone else at the crime laboratory.
Your Honor, I'm sorry, I don't remember the numbers. I'd move 40, is it 45 and 46 now?
Yes.
I'd move 45 and 46, if there's no objection.
No.
And I have no other questions. Thank you for your time, ma'am.
Can you read it back?
No.
Let me step down, ma'am. I haven't heard anything about food, so we'll just keep. Mr. Mayor? Yeah, well, here,
We have it digitally that will submit.
okay. Although actually, unless you need it, well, go ahead, do it.
No, you can have it. We have
No.
1,000 copies of it if you want it.
Let's fight over it.
Shall we continue?
Please.
This name called Susan Hughes, this name?
What was that? Just push that mic aside.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Ma'am, could you please state and spell your name for the benefit of the court reporter?
Susan Hughes, Hughes.
Ms. Hughes, did you know Anthony Huber?
Yes,
How did you know him?
I am his great aunt.
And,
His grandmother was my oldest sister.
and how did you come to know Anthony?
Well, my niece is his mother.
So, did you know him from when he was a child?
Yes.
And would you have considered yourself close to Mr. Huber?
Yeah, even when he was a child, we had kind of a special connection. But I was born in Kenosha. I moved away, came back in 2011, and from that time, we became even closer.
Now, you said you had a special connection. What do you mean by that?
He was a redhead. I used to be a redhead. He was, his immediate family, they were all blondes. So he kind of gravitated to me at family gatherings and things, even though when he was a child, I really only saw him, holidays and when I visited Kenosha, so, 4 or 5 times a year. But even then, he would gravitate towards me because I could talk to him about things he was interested in. I mean, we shared interest in art and music and computers, Star Wars, things that little boys like to talk about.
So, you said you would see him in Kenosha. Did Anthony grow up in Kenosha?
Yes, he was born here and went to school here.
Do you know if you know any schools he attended here?
Well, he's in the Southport neighborhood, so I think he went there perhaps. I know he was at St. Mark's for a while. And I don't know, those kids go to Lance maybe for middle school? I'm not sure.
Norm.
I was living in Madison, so I wasn't real connected to what schools he was going to.
So in 2011, you said you moved back to the Kenosha area,
Yes.
and you said you became more close. What do you mean by that?
Well, from that point, I moved back because I had health issues, and both of my sisters did. So I was seeing his grandmother quite frequently, and Anthony was very close to his grandmother. So, I would see him sometimes, once or twice a week. He would call her frequently. She moved in with me actually in 2013, and from that point, we saw Anthony even more. He frequently needed rides to jobs and things, and when she wasn't able to take him, I would take him.
And about how old would Anthony be in this time period?
Well, when I moved
Teenager,
back,
adult?
I think he was like 17, maybe, when I moved back here.
And even back then, did you ever know Anthony Huber to use a skateboard?
Always, always. The skateboard, I must confess, was kind of an annoyance to me because he would, when I first moved back here in 2011, we had a family gathering. We had a dinner in the winter, and I lived close to Penoyer Park. And Anthony arrived in a car. There was a foot of snow on the ground. He walked into my house with a skateboard and was going to, skate on my laminated floors. And I said, you can't skate in the house, and where are you going to skate anyway? Because there's snow on the ground. And he, picked up his skateboard, he went out and he found a place to skate in the snow. I mean, he always, even shortly before he died, when I would take him somewhere, he would know I was picking him up in a car, he was going to go home in a car, he would still have the skateboard in case there was a chance, there was an interesting parking lot somewhere, and he could go out and skate.
To the best of your knowledge, was that his main mode of transportation if he wasn't getting rides from
Yes.
you or someone else?
Yes, he skated sometimes to jobs if I wasn't available to take him there, or one of his friends. He would skate home frequently, quite long distances. Some of the temp jobs that he had were out by Jelly Belly and out by I-94, if people don't know where that is. Anton's, that's like Cooper Road or something. And so miles he would go on a skateboard.
And was this a hobby of his? Would he compete in skateboarding events to the extent you know?
That I don't know. I was a sometimes supporter of his habit.
Okay.
So, he would talk to me a lot about it. He would send me videos and things, but I really didn't follow whether he was competing. I know when he was younger, meaning, 18, 19, he was actively looking for sponsors and things. I mean, that was something he was interested in, but that never materialized.
No, were you finished? I'm sorry.
Oh, and I know that as he got older, one of his pipe dreams, he had told me, was that he had a vision for an indoor skate park downtown Kenosha, and
So skateboarding was central to his character. Is that fair to
yes,
say?
yes,
Now I'd like to draw your attention or bring you to late August of 2020. Were you living in Kenosha at that time?
yes,
And are you aware of the shooting of Jacob Blake and the events that followed that shooting?
yes.
And during that time frame, did Mr. Huber contact you?
Yes.
And when's the first time did you guys have like daily contact, or how did this come about?
Well, that whole weekend, a few days before, and then certainly after Jacob was shot, we had frequent contact during that period.
And did Mr. Huber have any special interest in the Jacob Blake shooting or the events that followed?
Yes.
And what was that special interest?
He told me that he knew Jacob. We had, Anthony would sometimes want to go with me out to Petrifying Springs. There's a memorial bench there that is dedicated to my son who
Right.
passed away. And after Jacob was shot, Anthony wanted to go out there with me. And while we were there, he told me he had known Jacob. I frankly don't recall how well he knew him. I mean, it just sticks in my memory that he said he knew him. That was the reason why we went out that day. He knew that Jacob had children. He knew, I remember him mentioning a few things about Jacob's life.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Did you know Jacob Blake?
I did not.
Now, so what day did you go to this, you said a memorial bench for your son? Mm-hmm. And was that someone that Anthony Huber was close to?
Yes.
And what day did you go to this memorial bench?
I believe it was Monday.
And that's when he told you about, that he knew Jacob Blake, and you
Yeah.
discussed his feelings about the protests and all that?
Yes.
Do you know if he had gone out on any on any night to engage in a protest?
I know he had gone, he had taken his phone. He told me he was just wanting to take some videos.
Now, it's been established that Anthony died on the late night of August 25th. Did you see him anytime that day?
Yes.
Why did you see him?
He stopped with Hannah late in the afternoon, maybe 3:30, 4 o'clock. They were on their way to do a lot of errands, and he stopped to, I think I gave him some mail, and he was on his way to a cell phone store.
Now, is this something that you would do? Would you occasionally give him money? Mm-hmm. And did he have a driver's license? Did he know how to drive?
Yeah, he got his driver's license the day of his birthday, the Friday before.
Okay. And who would go practice driving with him and things of that nature?
That was me.
You mentioned a Hannah. Who's Hannah?
Hannah was his girlfriend.
So, do you recall approximately what time of day that you saw Anthony that on August 25th?
Like I said, I think 3:30, 4 o'clock. I remember it being later in the afternoon because we had a conversation about the traffic, and I reminded him he needed to get back in town before curfew.
And then with that, did they depart?
Yeah.
And was
Well,
Hannah,
no, excuse me. Was that the, can you repeat that question?
Then they left after you said be back by curfew. Was that then
Yeah,
they left to go
yeah.
to the store?
Yeah.
Or wherever they went. Was Hannah driving at that point?
I think it was Hannah's car, but Anthony was driving.
Now, we've seen video here, and you may have seen video as well, that Anthony Huber ran towards Kyle Rittenhouse. Well, Kyle Rittenhouse was armed. Were you surprised when you heard about that? Were you surprised by his actions?
Sustained.
Had you ever seen Anthony Huber run towards danger?
Yes.
Sustained.
As to which ground?
Both. Well, maybe, certainly on the second ground. Habit or custom,
We've heard nothing but having a custom evidence in this case.
pardon me?
We've heard nothing but having a custom evidence. I think I can rehabilitate.
Well, first off, you don't need to comment on the ruling. Secondly, they're different rules. And we've been talking about this all along. There are different rules. let's take a break. Please don't talk about the case. Lunch is here. And read, watch, or listen to any account of the trial. And we'll aim for about 12:30.